Welcome everyone to our webinar on sustainability at scale. I'm Emma Wharton Love. I'm a workplace strategist at Interaction. And in Interaction, for those of you who don't know us, we're a workplace design and build company. And we set up this webinar because we've got a particular interest in sustainability as we're both developing our own strategy for environment, sustainability and governance. We're working towards B Corp as well. But also importantly, we're embedding ESG considerations into all of our workplace projects with our clients. So we kind of come at it at a few angles. We have got a really brilliant panel of experts today. We've got Joanna, Watchman, Lavin and Liesl, Wherry. Thank you very much, all three of you, for being with us. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Perhaps Joanna, Mary, then Liesl?
And you might have to go first, which is my worst nightmare. I'm Joanna Watchman. I run a business in the southwest called Content Comms. We specialise in ESG related communications, but primarily in the built environment. I also founded something called Work in Mind, which is why Interaction knows us, which is all about healthy buildings and well-being. So that gives me a different angle to bring to the party today.
Morning everybody, my name's Mary Lavin. I'm Sustainability and Reporting Manager for Osborne Clarke's UK business. Excuse me, struggling with a bit of hay fever this morning. I'm based here in our Bristol office, but we also have offices in London and Reading. We have about 1,300 colleagues across those three locations. Osborne Clarke is an international legal practice. We advise businesses and organisations on commercial law, finance, real estate, regulatory, all kinds of commercial risks and opportunities.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liesl Wherry. I'm a creative lead designer here at Interaction. And I basically spend my days being creative. And the rest of my days I spend teaching a team of 12 other designers how to do the same. I am really passionate about interior design, and I'm acutely aware of my responsibilities and the impact of my decisions when it comes to design and specification of workplaces. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts with you today.
Well, thank you all. So you can see that our panel bring really different perspectives. I think it's going to be a great discussion. So we're going to cover quite a lot today, I think. We're going to talk about the role of the workplace in improving sustainability credentials. We'll talk about the importance in retaining and recruiting the best talent, the role of leadership, and many more things. So without further ado, we'll crack on. We're going to take about 45 minutes-ish on the panel discussion, and then 15 minutes for Q&A. But if there's loads of Q&A comes in as we go through, we'll try and shorten the discussion and give it a bit more time for Q&A. We'll see how it goes. But we will start off by first talking about, I think, just the basics and the terminology. I guess the terminology around sustainability and ESG being environment, sustainability and governance. Mary, would you like to kick off by explaining how you define sustainability and perhaps what does it include from your perspective?
Well, actually, Liesl used the word that I think it comes down to for me. It's about impact. Sustainability is about considering the impact of our decisions and aiming to minimise any negative impact and maximise the positive impact of all our actions now and in the future. So the type of impact that might mean would really depend on the context that you're working in. Context is really important here as well. So I think probably it's down to what's most important and relevant to your organisation. So for me, I'm particularly interested in environmental sustainability. And on one level, that's about protecting and preserving the planet, ensuring there's clean air, clean water, good soil, a livable world for all future generations. But the reason why that's important is people and ensuring that people can thrive. And at Osborne Clarke, we also talk a lot about social sustainability and things like inclusion and diversity, employee well-being, communities. We do a lot of pro bono work and charitable giving, ethical business, supplier engagement, investing in our people. Those are all things that are part of the broader definition of sustainability for me, I think.
Well, it is a broad topic. We've got a lot to cover today. Liesl, what does sustainability have to do with design from your perspective?
Well, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, at Interaction, we design office spaces, and we work really hard to design spaces which are as sustainable as possible. And this is kind of focusing on environmental sustainability and kind of material, from a materials approach, really. The workplace is a physical manifestation of a company's brand and culture and the values, and therefore it's a great tool for businesses to be able to showcase and highlight how they are trying to solve and support their own ESG issues. So for me, from a design perspective, sustainability equates to responsibility, not only as a designer in terms of specifying materials and furnitures and fittings, but also kind of a responsibility to guiding and informing clients of the impact of their decisions. So, for example, if you're looking at specific items like T points and the location of those, informing clients of their decision making and how that impacts on quantity and potentially on your well points, or just from a kind of wider look at that. And I think I would conclude that sustainability in design for me equates to responsibility.
Oh, thank you. That's very inspiring. I am a bit confused about some of the language around sustainability. There's lots of acronyms, and then there's the word sustainability itself. Joanna, I think you're probably really well placed to talk about all this language and how it's shifted over time.
Yeah, I think it's shifted massively. And I think if you're, for someone like me, who's often working with listed businesses, it becomes an even bigger issue, because there is a fear about using the wrong word, and vocabulary is critical. So the things that people tend to get confused about is ESG, and is it different to sustainability? I've looked and looked for a sort of a consistent textbook definition, because I too worry about saying and doing the wrong thing and advising on the wrong thing. And you know what? It seems to me that actually the definitions are all a little fluffy in themselves. But the ESG generally, I would say, is the measurables. And that should be, in environmental, social and governance goals. And as I say, it's often in listed businesses or businesses with complex stakeholders that they're that who are looking to report on ESG. Sustainability, I mean, Mary is the expert on this, and I'm sort of a bit of a curator of information, so she can probably give you a much better definition. But I would say that sustainability really is a much wider, broader brush. It doesn't have to be the precise and measurable goals, etc., and it can cover a wider span. But I have seen board directors in PLCs absolutely quaking in their boots at saying the wrong thing in an investor relations context, because they don't want to look stupid. So anybody out there who's listening who is worried and is feared at getting the wrong answer, don't be, because you know what, we're all learning, I would say.
Yeah. And why do you think companies are all talking about ESG now? And who is typically responsible? Is it the board or the chief exec talking to their investors? Like, how, Joanna, or any of you? Sorry.
Well, if you're asking me, I'll try and be quick, since I was long-winded before. In terms of responsibility, my experience is that often sustainability is coming. Anyone with responsibility for sustainability has come from a different route. I work a lot in the built environment and in industry, and you might find that someone who was responsible for HR, health and safety, quality, something that's aligned, energy is the other one, they might end up at some point with a change in job title. So that's one thing. I think there is another generation, and there are some younger faces in this environment here. There is another generation which sits kind of under my kind of age group, who have actually gone through professional routes, university routes, and those people have got MScs in environmental this and sustainability that, and they have had that in their job title and job function coming right up through their careers from graduates. Mary will be, again, the expert on that, but I don't know what your view is, Mary. Is that reflected?
Yeah, it is. And I think it depends on each individual organisation again and how it's structured, but ultimately it needs to be owned by that top layer of leadership, and whatever that might mean. So I've worked in organisations where a chief financial officer was ultimately responsible for, we called it sustainability then. ESG is a term that's just come about more recently, and actually it's a term, in OC we talk about it more probably with our clients than internally with our own stakeholders. We tend to use other language like CSR, and responsible business essentially is what it comes down to. And I think that, so the team I work with now, for example, we deliver the majority of that work for Osborne Clarke, and we're part of the HR function, which is new for me. I've been here less than a year, and it's the first time I've been based in an HR team, but it's absolutely right for us because we're a very people-focused business, and we need to be close to the services that HR provide, because our biggest customers are our people, I guess, in our context. But I've also worked in estates and facilities, in compliance, QC, as you say, because I'm a sustainability professional. And that's great for the day-to-day delivery, but ultimately the leadership needs to come, the direction of the strategy needs to come from that senior leadership. And I'm really lucky here at Osborne Clarke, we have an executive board that's made up of really a cross-functional team of very senior decision makers who have really placed ESG at the heart of our 2025 business strategy. It gets discussed at board meetings alongside finance and business development and risk management and all those really important topics. And I think that helps me to do the day-to-day job, because I know I've got the buy-in of our senior leaders here.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure we'll circle back to that leadership buy-in conversation again, because it's later in this chat, because I think it's so important. But first, let's spend just a few minutes talking about the workplace and the role of the physical workplace in improving sustainability credentials. And Mary, I was wondering if we could stick with you for a minute. For you, like, how much difference can the physical workplace make on sustainability credentials? We were talking about like how wide ESG is for Osborne Clarke, and like how does the workplace factor into that breadth?
I think it can make a huge difference. It's really part of our culture, and part of the way we work is about, obviously we've had a huge disruption over the last couple of years, and we're not quite back to how things were, and some would say let's hope we never do go back to the way things were before. We've got new ways of working, but our workplaces are really core to that, as part of a mix of other ways of working. And so the role of the workplace in our sustainability strategy, it's got different layers, I think. So we think about our kind of core services in buildings, and we think about the way that we consume utilities and the way that we manage waste that arises from our activities. We think about how people access our workplace or move between workplaces if you've got multiple sites. It's quite an important part of it as well. So there are those kind of core services, and then there are impacts associated with what goes on in the space. So you might be handling materials that have an impact on air quality or water quality in your building, and therefore health and well-being is part of how your workplace supports that or contributes to your sustainability outcomes, or how you facilitate those ways of working in that community, and what meeting spaces you have, or individual workstations that encourage collaboration, or quiet space and well-being again. So yeah, I think, as I've said, the number one impact on sustainability is people, through our habits and our behaviours. But the workplace is probably next on the list, and can really facilitate those more sustainable ways of working.
Great. And I think Liesl, that leads kind of nicely onto that design perspective. Like, how important is the design and the fit out spec in sustainability or ESG?
Yeah.
This change, please.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it links so well with what Mary was just saying. It's creating spaces for people and kind of looking at the mental health well-being aspect of that. Other than our homes, the workplace is the second place where you spend so much of your time. So obviously that workplace can massively contribute to emotional, cognitive, sensory kind of input and load that we receive throughout the day. So it can have a massive impact on your health and well-being. So as a designer, it is so important for us to create spaces where the impact is a positive one rather than a negative one. And we have many tools to kind of go about this. And yes, linking back to sustainability, but there's so many different ways of achieving this. By designing thoughtful spaces that can reduce stress and improve cognitive performance and can positively impact on our emotions and mood and perceptions. Some ways of doing this is by creating visual connections with nature. This can impact on things like blood pressure and heart rate and reduce stress hormones. And by playing around with things like dynamic and diffuse light settings, we can positively impact on circadian functioning. And all of these things combined reduce stress and improves your cognitive performance and your mood and emotions. So there's definitely a massive impact on mental wealth by the way that we design spaces and the way that we approach the finishes and the kind of layout of spaces.
Emma, can I add to what Liesl was saying, because I think we quite often, when I'm wearing my Work in Mind hat, and for workinmind.org, if anybody is looking, and we get asked a lot by people who are in the interaction kind of space, either customer side or intent, for data. There is so much data to support what Liesl has just told you. If anybody is concerned that you can't build a business case about investments in these things, go and look online, give me a call, whatever, but have a look, because everything that's just been said is not just that's not just nonsense. That is proven scientifically and by multiple high quality academic research studies. So yeah, it really is a thing, and it really does need to be factored into investment planning, and it's how we need to design and build for the future.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, really well made point. And I guess leading from that, how in an ideal world, I think this is probably both Liesl for you and for Joanna. Like in an ideal world, how would you build in sustainability from the start of like a new project? If you were doing like a new fit out, how would you go about it? Would you need to build a business case at the start, or does it depend on the leadership perhaps and how bought in they are?
Yeah, so I would say from the start, so it's kind of important, well, super important to establish what measuring tool the client that you're working with is using. And when I say measuring tool, I'm not referring to just a WELL or a BREEAM certification process. I'm also referring to your values and your targets and your hopes and the dreams of your client. Kind of what is the aim and what do you want to achieve? And how can we achieve that in the most authentic way possible? I think that's the starting point. You need to establish that before you move on to anything else. And then I think it's about finding the right balance. So for example, if there's a balance between specifying something which will last a long time, or specifying something which is sourced locally. There's different benefits to each of those things, and it's, as I say, kind of figuring out the measuring tool and what you want to achieve before actually setting out that process of specifying and designing.
I think I can honestly say I agree with every word of that. I mean, my kind of perspective would be that you need to know what matters is the starting point, and you need to have cross-functional buy-in. Mary will, I'm sure, be able to kind of talk through how that works in a real life business and situation, but often I kind of come in as an external on that process, and I really enjoy that because you become part of the team. But you need to understand what matters. There's all those materiality assessments and things like that, but that's all industry words, isn't it? I'd rather just describe it as what matters to your business, and you need to get some baselines in as well. Liesl brought up the M word about measurement, and my experience, you haven't asked us about post-project, you're probably going to do that later on, but my experience is that if there is anything that's going to get cut at the end, it will be, how did we do, how did we perform, how do we measure, because that does cost some time, money, whatever, to get professionals to do that. But I would urge anybody on this undertaking to try and understand kind of where you're at now, and to ask for help, look around. Not everything has to be expensive with people that can come in and support this stuff, or ask your network on LinkedIn, find people that are doing something similar to you, because people love to share their journey. But I think the other key thing is get cross-functional buy-in, and don't make this just something that the board or whoever just chucks at everybody. It's got to come through.
Brilliant. I think we might talk a little bit more about getting that buy-in later as well. That's something it's a really interesting topic. But I was just thinking about, if you weren't launching into a big new fit-out project and you're an existing occupier of some space, like Mary, perhaps you might be well placed to help us with this. It's like, what small changes in your experience can make the biggest difference? And yeah, is there a different approach also if you own the building or if you're a tenant? Like, would you take different tactics? How would you work with the landlord? All that kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah, I think there is definitely a difference. But if I go back to your first question, I think, and to follow on actually from what Liesl and Joanna were saying, having a plan and a strategic direction, and therefore measuring the data, are really important elements for long-term success, because we do need to be thinking long-term, but there can be a temptation to be thinking so long-term that you're trying to get those things in place at the outset before you take any action, and in the meantime you want to be getting, yes, cross-functional buy-in at the leadership level, but from everywhere in your business there's a role for everybody, so you don't want to be delaying things. So in the meantime, while you're working on that, you can probably identify some tangible actions to take while you're developing all of that, and those can really help with that engagement and the buy-in. And so some examples, I would say, we know what's not sustainable is our reliance on fossil fuels. So can you look at where your energy comes from? Maybe look at having a provider that uses 100% renewable energy certified. There's a whole other minefield of information about that. That's probably for another webinar. But you could look into that. You can look at maybe your reward and benefits package. So we've got a salary sacrifice scheme here that helps people to buy electric vehicle or lease electric vehicles or e-bikes. Engaging people in that can be really powerful. How do you get to work? Can you link that back to your commute? Can you look at things like maybe your pension scheme and where your money is invested? That's quite a powerful action that individuals and businesses can take to divest away from funds that support fossil fuel extraction or deforestation is the other big global contributor to the climate crisis that we're in. What else? We know we can't sustain a culture of single use. So if you've got a staff canteen, or maybe you even run a catering business, could you make it easier for people to use refillable? It's World Refill Day today, or UK Refill Day. I don't know if anyone knew that. There's an event going on actually near our office today where people are being encouraged to bring refillable containers to the food market. It's just becoming part of the day-to-day. So there are lots of actions you can take to start building that kind of buzz and demand for sustainable business, while at the same time you're thinking strategically and how are we going to really make a big difference here. There was another part to your question, Emma, sorry, about whether you are...
Yeah, whether you're an owner occupier or a tenant. Wonder if it made a difference.
Yes, it can do. So I think they're probably, if you're an owner occupier, it probably is easier to make decisions about energy efficiency, for example. So maybe upgrading plant and equipment, or investing in the thermal envelope of your building and prevent leaky roofs, leaky windows. There was a report out recently, I think last week, I think it was the International Energy Agency, reminding everyone that in all the buzz about net zero and renewables, that we shouldn't forget the role of energy efficiency and addressing our demand reduction in the first place. So if you can make your building more leak proof, there's probably a better word for that, Liesl, you might know. Those, that's the kind of hierarchy of measures that you can take, is actually reducing demand in the first place, investing in really good controls, timers and sensors and things to sort of reduce waste. So some of those things are easier if you're an occupier, an owner. But if you are a tenant, engage your landlord in it. They're part of the solution. They've got a really big responsibility. So yeah, you might need to identify where you can make a difference yourselves, where you've got the authority to do certain things or the influence, and leveraging our influence is a huge part of this. I think talking to our connections, and our landlords are a big part of our supply chain for Osborne Clarke, so we're having those conversations.
Emma, can I just add very quickly to that often it's sustainability investment, so better controlled zone lighting, etc., that's more sensitive to the human beings and human eyes, better heating, cooling, ventilation, all of those sustainability measures that deliver on energy demand reduction are absolutely inextricably linked to human well-being outcomes. And that was actually my own kind of career path, was linking those two things up. That's for another day. But it's really important, because if anybody out there is trying to build a business case for well-being, have a think about energy demand reduction when you're talking about environmental factors.
Thank you. And there's so much we could be doing in this space, and a lot of us are doing. But I wonder, if you're just making your first steps, where would you start? What would be your first step in working towards an ESG strategy, or actually starting to make changes? Joanna, do you have a view on that?
Well, when I do this with companies, it starts, I think, really with my previous kind of response. So I'll be quick, but you need to understand what matters. You need some baselines. You need to get people in from across the business that aren't, as I say, or can't always be here, but you need strong leadership, which is exactly what Mary said, and you need someone to own that process, and don't be afraid to get external support in. So that's the quick answer.
Thank you. Anyone, Mary or Liesl, do you have a view on that?
I think, just to reiterate that, I think, yes, measuring, understanding, thinking about I keep using this word context. That's a really important part of it. Where can you make the most material difference, and what's relevant to your business? Kind of make things that, we've got some impact areas in OC that we've determined are important to us in our responsible business strategy. And you have to make choices that, about planning and prioritizing. You can't do everything overnight, but frameworks and standards and things can be helpful as well, to kind of benchmark against, or kind of give some ideas about what your priorities should be, risk assessment, and taking that kind of the same approach that you would take to any project in your organisation. You can apply that to ESG and sustainability.
So I think we've established that taking sustainability seriously is like a very big undertaking. At Interaction, we've been working with Earthly on our carbon assessment and identifying reduction opportunities and offsetting options as well. And we're also using the process of B Corp to sort of get some great information. And so there's loads of expert support out there. And Joanna, you've mentioned sort of asking for help and working with experts as well. And I wondered, how can clients and consultants work well together to achieve their goals? And perhaps, Liesl, maybe you could talk a little bit about a live example of how Interaction and OC collaborated on this.
Yeah, so I think we spent so much time kind of working at before kind of brief stage. And I think the thing that we decided from the start is to be able to be successful in this project, we needed to understand how different people work, and we needed to try and accommodate this within a space. So all of this kind of links together, how to design a sustainable space, how to design a space which is healthy and works well for everyone within the space, is need to understand how people want to use the space and how, what their working habits are and their aspirations. And with our kind of work with Osborne Clarke, we had some months of intensive consultation between the design team, myself, a few of our project leads, and hundreds of employees across the firm, and the staff had a chance to, you know, describe the different job roles and how that kind of involves within the space, how that works within the space. We brought furniture in so people could try out furniture. Throughout this whole process, we had staff working groups, and these were looking at specific particular areas within the space, such as the office layouts, accessibility, finishes, just trying to ensure that the brief which we set out from the start was being met throughout. And it's been quite an intensive process, and taking things from this conversation, I guess, is specific things like the spin studio and the yoga studio. These were things that were requested by people in these conversations, and I think it's been very lovely throughout the process to be able to maintain that and still have that in the final product. I know we still have to build it, but it's there, and we're aiming towards getting that there. And I think another thing to make sure that we align our design work to kind of sustainability credentials is that we've been trying to work towards the WELL standards as well. So we've incorporated that within the design process and decision making, and just kind of setting up those base checkpoints to make sure that we maintain that vision throughout and remain authentic to what we set out in the original brief.
Yeah, I think that partnership has been fantastic with Interaction and Osborne Clarke, and it's been we've got a really good working relationship. We've learned so much through that process, and working together on the WELL standard as well has been really just it's a very involved process, and I think, Emma, you'll know this from the B Corp standard is it's a great certification to go for, but it's a huge undertaking, and I think it's a great idea to bring in specialist support to help your business get the most out of that. You probably have, actually at Osborne Clarke, we've just announced our commitment to science-based targets as part of a carbon emissions reduction strategy, and we've been working with another consultancy, Carbon Intelligence, to measure our baseline footprint, develop a roadmap for how we're going to achieve that. These are things that we probably could have done ourselves. We probably have the knowledge and the expertise to do it, but we don't have necessarily the time and the resource. And actually, it's not what we do every day. So those are opportunities to build those partnerships and bring in external support and consultancy, and knowing when the right time is to do that, to get the most out of it, and to really help us to understand what is it that we're trying to achieve here, planning, who needs to do what. Again, it's a very cross-functional process. It involves lots of different people. Excuse me, and that might lead to us developing our skills to do more of that in-house in the future, but it's definitely right to bring experts in for those kinds of projects. And Interaction, we probably couldn't have done what you guys have been doing for us. It's been incredible. It's been a really eye-opening kind of journey, just designing our new Halo building, and sustainability has really been at the heart of it, and Interaction have really understood that for us and helped us to identify opportunities to work in sustainability credentials at every opportunity, which actually we wouldn't have been able to do ourselves. We need that knowledge from you guys to get the most out of it.
There's something really interesting there about knowledge transfer, and look, if we're using a lot of consultants now, and how what do we sort of learn to then start doing in-house and taking on as sort of business as usual. But I'm wondering, in terms of like going for standards and measuring and metrics, Mary, have you found that doing those activities like drives behaviours? Because you said that people are actually the number one impact, and workplace is probably second. Have you found, in your experience, that behaviours change because you're able to monitor and prove what's going on?
It can do, yeah. So we've mentioned there we're pursuing the WELL accreditation for Halo, and that's a big project. It involves lots of different people. that particular accreditation is great because it's very transparent about how you can progress. And actually that one, so there's a kind of credit system, you build credits, a bit like BREEAM, if anyone's familiar with BREEAM. You know in advance which areas you can target to gather the evidence, and actually evidence is really crucial too. So that's a really important part of going for a standard. So you can't just pay lip service to something. You need to see it through, and you need to have that assurance that it's in place. My background actually professionally is in environmental management systems. So I don't know if any of your clients or anyone on the call holds ISO 14001, for example. That's an accreditation for environmental management systems. That can be a good one, particularly if your operations have a significant environmental aspect. So if you handle a lot of hazardous substances, or you've got sites that are in designated areas and you've got lots of compliance risks to manage, that standard can give a really helpful framework for continual improvement. And so, well, in contrast to that is more structured in layers. So we know you can aim for a bronze, silver, gold, platinum levels, and you can identify a pathway to progress through those levels that informs, you know, your priorities. How are you going to target? You know, we might be here now, but maybe in a year or two's time, we'd like to be here, like to be assessed again, so we can use that time for planning, and it's woven into our strategy. So I think standards and accreditations can really help, but it also that we don't really want to be completely governed by them, and we need some flexibility to just do the right thing because it's the right thing and not because the standard requires us to do something. I guess you might have found the same with B Corp. You need to be creative, and you want although it gives a framework and kind of where you should broadly be aiming for, within that, how you meet that framework needs to really reflect your culture and what your business is about. So yes, they can drive change, but we shouldn't be too ruled by them, I think.
Would it be fair to say that the process of going for the standard is more important than getting the standard itself, because that framework is,
if it's done well, you know, if again it might be an opportunity to bring in external support to help you to do it well and to get the most out of that process, yes, rather than, you know, probably all seen examples of kind of scrabbling around at the last minute, or having an auditor in and everything's great for the auditor, but then it all kind of goes back to, you know, but if to get really the most value out of these things, they need to be really woven into the way that you do business.
Yeah, I think it actually links back really nicely to what I said previously about establishing that kind of measuring tool, or what you want to achieve, your goals, and you know, that standard from the start before you start the process, so that you can kind of put those checks in place and see that you're remaining on track with what your final goal is, even if it isn't kind of the tick box exercise, leaving the well aside, but just kind of aligning yourself with those processes and aligning yourself with the goals at the end of it, to remain authentic in that way.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move us from standards back towards people again, actually. So at the moment, there's the great resignation that everyone's talking about, and talent retention and recruitment is a really hot topic right now. And also there's research being done that by the end of this decade, that millennials and Gen Z will make up 3/4, I think, of the world's workforce. And I think in 2019, I've got it written down here, it was just 50%. And I think these generations seem to place a greater importance on environmental and social concerns than their predecessors. And I just wondered, perhaps, Joanna, this is, you might be the right person to aim this question at, but like, do you think ESG performance, how important is that for attracting and retaining talent, particularly
it is the conversation. It's got to happen, and it has to. It's driving everything, and any company who doesn't research that, and any HR director or people and performance director or whatever in a business who's not reading that stuff and absorbing it, needs their heads examined, frankly. There's some really good data out. Have a look. I know that Interaction's got a cracking white paper, so everybody should be looking at that. But plug for our sponsors here, but Bupa, the medical healthcare people, they do a Gen Z, they've done a survey. If you Google the Generation Z data that they've put together, I've got a summary of it on my screen here, but there's some fascinating kind of facts in there about behaviours, attitudes, and the decisions that that generation will make when they are choosing. I think just to counter that, I remember having a fascinating conversation with somebody who looked after all of the buildings and facilities for IBM or something like that, and she said, you know what, it's all very well let everybody kind of looking at the youngsters, but we have to create workspaces that work for everybody, and it's not just about single generation, and that's Liesl's kind of team's great challenge, I am sure. So there is a balance to be struck, but I would urge anybody, I know we're short on time, but I would urge anybody who is in the mood for a bit of tippy-tappy research, just have a look. And the Bupa report is a really cracking place to start. If I can put a link to it in the chat, and folks can have a look at that later. That helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I just realised the time. We've only got a few minutes of the 45 minutes I said that we'd discuss for. So I'm going to ask one last question to bring our discussion to a section to a close, but please, everyone on the call, feel free to start putting any questions in the chat to us. So this is a question for any of you, but maybe starting with Joanna. I'm just wondering, sort of wrapping up this conversation, how we can be like authentically sustainable and not be accused of that awful term greenwashing, and like where would it be really easy to slip up in all of this?
Easy to slip up on all of it, I think. The worst thing, I'm going to be really quick, the worst thing you can do is say nothing. You need to, people respect honesty and truth, and it's any journey. There will be the up days, the down days, and there will be a point at which you're not where you need to be. So I would urge people to think about saying something, being honest about that pathway, and open and transparent, and to remember that transparency, authenticity and decency is always rewarded in the greater scheme of things.
That's a lovely way to end. Does anyone, Mary or Liesl, do you have anything to add on that authentic sustainability?
I completely agree with Joanna. I think it's rare that a business would set out to deceive or greenwash deliberately, or a slip up is a slip up, and there's actually a role for marketing professionals here actually to be aware of that risk and to use your amazing storytelling skills to bring about kind of meaningful action. And we all, some of the claims there is more and more scrutiny actually about the claims that businesses are making. So it's good to really be aware of that. We all like to be the first ones or the only ones to be achieving something, but there's a story in being the 100th one to do something, or the 268th one to do something. It's just part of a growing movement because it's the right thing to do, and celebrate that. So there's a role for marketing professionals. And I think with the net zero debate is raging. I think we hear a lot of press about claims that businesses are making and what's really involved in that. Even science-based targets, which we chose because they're the most credible way for a company to progress to net zero. Science-based targets are not immune from that scrutiny, and targets are targets. So there are risks there that and so authenticity, transparency, openness, data can be important, so sharing our data and being clear about where it's come from. All of that is really important, and there might come a point where we have to say we got something wrong, and here's what we've learned, and here's what we're doing about it, and we're going to try it another way. But that's the culture that we are aiming for in OC. That's that it's okay to do that, and we're all learning, and the main thing comes down to that culture of openness and transparency, and that in itself builds trust and protects our reputation more than probably brushing issues under the carpet would. So that's the aim.
Thank you. I think with Liesl, unless you want to come in, but I think we're very quiet on the Q&A front here. I haven't seen any come in. I'll take it as a positive that we've had such a rich conversation, that we've covered everything. But please feel free to pop questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I would just link back to what Mary was saying, is from a design perspective and throughout the process, is to remain authentic. It's just kind of when you set up the brief at the beginning of the design, like the whole design process, it's just kind of making sure that you set out what you want to achieve and set those checkpoints in place to make sure, touch base, check back. Are we actually looking? Are we actually trying? Are we on the right path? Are we still heading towards where we want to go? And as Mary says, like kind of reflecting back on, have we achieved this, or are we not able to achieve this? Step back, look at it from a different perspective. Is there a different way we can achieve this, or, you know, from a different, I don't know, design perspective or finishes, specification, all of those things.
Well, we've had thank you for the thanks in the chat, but I think I am gonna take the no Q&A and no Q's as a real positive. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much to all our panelists. Sorry, just checking the chat. I've just been asked to requote the Gen Z stats. I'll pop it in the chat, those stats, and the source of them as well. Yeah, so thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. It was a super interesting conversation. Vicky's just put all our LinkedIn details in the chat, so feel free to get in touch with any of us about anything we've discussed. As Joanna said, there's an ESG paper you can download on Interaction's website. I think it might already be higher up in the chat. If not, Vicky will put it in now. And yeah, there's probably nothing left to say, but a big thank you. And thank you all for spending nearly an hour of your time on a glorious sunny day joining us on this webinar.